Starting now to get into what I want from a color commentator. This is like almost the number one thing, right? Is the matching of the energy and being able to set me up for the play-by-play. Like, take this as an analogy. I'm really full of them today, Avril. We've got a trebuchet,
Mangoes,
right?
to me.
No, well, I guess maybe we can tie mangoes in, right? We've got a trebuchet, okay? And it's ready to fire, but there's nothing in it right now. I'm the trebuchet. The play-by-play commentator is the trebuchet. I want you to put the mango in the basket that I can then shoot into the fight. You know, I really want to be able to unleash, but you need to set me up properly and give me that opportunity, build the level up enough, and provide me the segue into the fight that I need as a play-by-play commentator to really be able to go kind of crazy. All right, well, here we go again, Avril. Hard Start Casters. We're into episode number 6. I can't believe we got all the way here, but this time we're talking about something that is very near and dear to both of our hearts, aren't we? Casting and all of the stuff that goes into that, which is beautiful.
Guess what we spent 5 episodes not talking about, and then we realized, hang on a second, like what is it that we do again? Oh yeah, what should we talk about casting for one episode?
The one thing that we're like quote unquote experts. I mean, if I was to say I'm an expert at one thing, I would say it's probably casting esports. So yeah, that's what we're talking about in this episode. We're going to be talking primarily, I think what we want to do here is we want to sort of go a little bit more in depth into casting as opposed to do sort of the base level introduction basics kind of stuff, which, you know, I feel like you can kind of get anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
So the idea with this is if you're a caster that is at least reasonably veteran, I suppose, you've been maybe casting for a year or a year and a half, something like that, but you haven't been able to break out into studio gigs or even bigger gigs than that, I suppose. This might be potentially helpful for you, like maybe understanding what you should be doing as a play-by-play or a color commentator, or I suppose we'll talk about a few different things as well. But yeah, that's the intention. And so after we do a little bit of that discussion, we'll talk about what we think newer casters tend to fall short on in these roles as well. So it's going to be ideally, the way that I'd like to characterize this, Avril, is maybe a bit of a casting masterclass. I don't know if you want to go that far.
Oh, a class to me would be more like of where I don't know that it's really a teaching. I suppose it's a lot about talking about what we think things are like. So to preface this, it's more like, you know, the disclaimer would be it really is just our opinions. The truth about casting and broadcasting and esports in general is there's a lot of gray area in terms of, okay, what can you just play around with, and not everything is necessarily black and white in terms of this is absolutely correct and this is absolutely incorrect. I think there are definitely things that maybe fall into those categories, but a lot of casting is kind of just feeling it out and just kind of finding your own space and, you know, carving out what works for you. And this is, and to speak to myself, but also you might agree with this, Jordan, but, you know, we'll be speaking about from our experience in the industry and what we've learned through casting. And it's very relatable to, I guess, how we got here and also, what has worked for us.
Yeah.
And so the disclaimer is going to have to be your mileage may vary in terms of, hey, what we've found has worked for us may not work for everybody, but also there's definitely a few things in there that I strongly believe in terms of how casting works, especially in terms of how it's worked for me. And I guess it's anecdotal evidence of like, okay, this has been working extremely well for me. I think this is a really good thing, but I'm also very, very critically aware that, you know, there's definitely other people with very different styles that have made it really work and have had a lot of success as well. So I guess, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, but also, yeah, open your ears. We'll see how we go.
And I think another caveat to that as well is that for both you and I, when we actually first got involved in the industry, like, I don't know how long you've been casting for, but I've been casting for 5, maybe nearly 6 years now. I don't know who's counting.
I'd say about the same. Yeah.
So things have probably changed a lot since then as well. Like, obviously, I know things have changed a lot from how I operate as a caster. But on the base level, as a new caster, things have probably changed a lot as to how you kind of get involved in casting to begin with versus what it was like 5 or 6 years ago. So anyway, let's dive into things here, Avril. Obviously, we want to talk about both of the roles. I think we should start off with play-by-play commentary first, and this is kind of my forte more so than yours. But I think maybe you should start off by asking me the question, or, you know, what are we talking about here? So at least that at least I can answer you. I feel like it's a bit awkward if I just answer myself in a way.
The thing is, it's not just about you talking about play-by-play and me talking about color here, but it's also us talking about what our experience is working with the other rollers, and, you know, maybe even a little bit about how we've experienced the other role in terms of trying it out. I know you've filled color in the past. I've definitely filled play-by-play in the past. And so, we definitely have our more dominant roles, but we also have a bit of experience in the other on the other side as well, but also experience in terms of expectations for what we want to see from the other role, what we think is good from the other role. And so I guess we'll start with play-by-play, and just real quick as well before we get really deep into it. This is going to have a lot of assumed knowledge. So, we are already assuming that there are roles like play-by-play and color that exist in casting. We are assuming that you probably know what casting is to start with. There's going to be, I guess, not a lot of introductory kind of things going on here in this particular episode where we're going to be explaining, oh, here's an introduction to what this is. More so, we assume you know what it is, and we're going to go deeper into it. So, if we're happy with that, I'm happy to get started with play-by-play with you as well. So I guess for me coming into it, you as a play-by-play Jordan, what do you think is encompassed in the play-by-play role, and what do you think makes a good play-by-play commentator fitting into that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, and it sort of depends on what kind of broadcast you're doing, right? It changes a lot if you're a bedroom caster versus if you're casting in a stadium. I very much vary the way that I commentate as a play-by-play commentator when I'm doing something like, for example, an IEM Sydney, which I've done a couple of times now, or a Crossfire Stars Grand Finals, which is also another stadium event, versus a broadcast that I'm doing in my bedroom or even the studio in ESL. So I want to sort of preface this by saying that I think it's probably, there's not too much value in me saying anything to do with bedroom casting, because again, that's probably just where people are at this point learning the fundamentals of casting. But I want to focus more on once you sort of hit that studio phase, or if you're trying to move into that studio phase, trying to sort of take it a little bit more professionally. The way that I would sort of try to sum it up in like a phrase is that you, or your job is really to articulate or to describe the events that are happening on screen in a way that adds value to what's being presented. So you could say that you're adding value to what's already on the screen rather than just basically saying what is on the screen, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yep. I agree with that a lot. I think that's where you start to look at the difference in some play-by-plays, and I know we'll get into the sort of pitfalls of newer casters in a later segment, but I definitely think being able to add value to what is being presented on screen is a big difference between newer casters and more experienced casters, because that's where I see a lot of places where if you're not quite familiar with the game, or you're not quite familiar with your role, you're kind of prone to reading off a kill feed, or you're prone to just saying what's surface level and saying what's obvious, and you haven't added a lot to the audience's experience in terms of, okay, well, what am I being told here that I don't already know is a big one for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of instances where you will see commentators kill feed reading, which is obviously it's a part of play-by-play, but the idea is to make the kill feed reading interesting, or ideally not even kill feed read, but still sort of catch the important bits. And so what I think is really important with, just talking about articulating or describing what's happening is being able to find the important moments of whatever's happening on the screen in the fight and catching that, as opposed to trying to be a catch-all, because you want to kind of direct the viewer's attention to what the important thing is. If you see someone, let's take, for example, a CSGO example. If you see a player who's going to try and plant the bomb, and then that player gets picked, but that kill doesn't necessarily happen from the point of view of what's happening on the screen, you probably still do want to point that out, because that's a really important factor in the round or something like that. So, it's very important to sort of pick and choose your moment, I think, as a play-by-play caster, instead of trying to catch everything in the fight, because at that point, that's where you end up essentially just vomiting and dribbling, whatever's happening, and it ends up being like, okay, X gets the kill, Y gets the kill, then X gets the other kill, and then Y gets the other kill, and wow, the round's over. But you don't really know what's ended up happening outside of X or Y got the kills, but you don't really know how they got them, or where they got them, or what the implication of what they got them was.
Which is something that Mitch, who you probably know as Uber, for everyone at home, that is, he's definitely mentioned, casting Overwatch has been the extreme version of that, where Overwatch is such a information dense kind of game. He sort of mentioned trying to play by play of what just kind of trying to catch a waterfall with a teaspoon in his exact literal words. And I think that's a great analogy in terms of finding the balance. And it's not just for Overwatch here, but talking to all games, talking to play by play in general, finding the balance of what you are trying to catch versus what is out there to catch, and not trying to, fail to grab too much at the same time, but also, being focused on something. But yeah, having the sort of sense and the sort of experience to know, okay, this is important for the audience, this is important to talk about right now, because in terms of the context of where the game is, or what is happening with the overall storylines and all that, this is the thing to focus on, even from a play-by-play perspective. And you're not ever going to be able to catch absolutely everything. And also there's a bit of crossover there with talking about how color casters fit into this mix, where, hey, I think a lot of play-by-plays can feel comfortable to, if you have a good partnership with your co-commentator, you should feel confident enough to sort of leave a lot of detail to your color commentator to pick up. So as a play-by-play, you sort of remove that burden from yourself. I don't need to catch everything. I know my colors are going to catch a lot of that for me as well. I'm going to focus on what is important now and just take that path and just go forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good point to bring up, because a lot of the time I will see people who aren't commentators or who haven't really had much to do with esports commentary or production or anything like that, who are, I suppose, an outside viewer to that realm, sort of talking about play-by-play commentators and in a way sort of saying that they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't seem to pick up on things. And sometimes it's kind of more of a conscious decision to not pull the rug out from your color commentator in a way, because if I'm sort of throwing all of that, then what does he have to talk about in a way? So I tend not to try and do too much like analysis stuff. What I tend to try and do when I'm play-by-playing is give the color commentator a point or something to sort of start them off on. And if they don't, if they want to use that, then great. Like, they can go deep into whatever I've sort of brought up, or if they're not too interested, they briefly touch on it and then go on to whatever their point is. But it's not necessarily my role as the play-by-play commentator to be making those sort of informed, analytical kind of color commentary remarks quite so much, because then that in a way almost undermines my color commentator, because again, like, that's kind of his job. So if I'm doing his job, why does he exist?
And I don't mind if a play-by-play wants to make an analytical statement. Now, there's a difference between making a statement and then going into detail. And I think that's kind of where we're getting at as well. It's like, yeah, if you are starting to go heavily into what I would consider a color segment, that is more so, I'm hearing something that really I should be talking about. That's what I'm thinking. You probably shouldn't be talking about that as a play-by-play, which is why I think, if you just sort of get near that level, but you don't cross the line, you just hear, I have something analytical to say. Because I also think, a decent amount of play-by-plays do have some analytical content to offer as well, in terms of during their segments. It's not just pure, laying off exactly what is happening on the screen or anything like that, but in terms of talking about the context, in terms of talking about here's how things are going to go down. I'm as a play-by-play, laying down the sort of foundations here of where we're expecting the events to unfold in the next few seconds, maybe, and adding a bit of context through analysis there perhaps, but you're not going deep into detail there. You're just sort of laying the groundwork, and then you're letting it unfold. And then when it goes to the color, then they can really unwrap that if they want to. And I like to have play-by-plays that can sort of dangle those threads in front of me, just have a lot of threads available. And then as a color of someone like me, I can then choose what to pull on. I have a real big pet peeve against colors that kind of play-by-plays that will force me into a corner. So I'll probably get more into this when we start talking about color in more depth, but I want to have as a color working with a play-by-play, I want to have the options. I want to have a few threads dangled in front of me. I don't have to take them. The options available. I might decide I have a different thread I want to go down. My play-by-play might mention something. I may decide to touch up on it. I may decide, actually, I got something else I really want to talk about instead. And those things to all be equal weighted options for me to take, and I don't feel like I have to take one or the other, and there's a lot for me to work with there.
Yeah, that to me is a really important point as well, particularly for commentators who haven't really worked too much in a duo. What you talk about in saying that, you don't like when a play-by-play sort of directly puts you on a certain route, is definitely true for you, but there may be other color commentators who may not actually mind that, and I guess it really depends on what your duo is. So I think the most important thing when it comes to casting in a duo in particular, and from my perspective as a play-by-play commentator, is to find out what your color commentator, what their limits are for a start, because I think it's really important to know like what directions you kind of can lead them to and what you can't. And obviously you have to have that faith that if you do lead them in a direction that they are going to have an answer for that. Otherwise, again, that could be a pretty awkward, sticky situation for the color commentator that they have to then try and get themselves out of. But not only that, but you also have to find out how they want you to lead them in that direction, or if they even want to be led in a direction, to be honest. Some color commentators just want to do their own thing, and they just want you to stop doing your play-by-play and give them the free reins as to where they want to lead it. But others tend to prefer it if you lead it in a certain direction. And again, that also sort of comes down to, I think, the experience as well of your duo as well. Like if you're a very experienced play-by-play commentator with a very inexperienced color commentator, maybe it is better to do a little bit of hand-holding, and vice versa as well. I think the same for a color commentator. If I'm completely new to a game, for example, and I'm the play-by-play, then I probably want a bit of a helping hand in a way with, the setups of the fights or whatever it may be. But, if you're going to tell me this and this and this might happen in the coming fight, then I sort of know what to look out for while I'm commentating it, and that also sort of helps the viewers. So again, that touches a little bit more on the color commentary side of things, but very, very important, particularly I think for the play-by-play, to be kind of in tune with what their color commentator likes and what their color commentator wants, because after all, it is a pairing, it's a duo that you kind of have to work together in a sense of harmony. Otherwise, it can get pretty awkward.
And I guess we'll wrap up the color talk for now, because I want to get a little bit deeper into that later on. But to go back to more play-by-play focused topic here, you mentioned, okay, you're bringing a different level to whether it's bedroom or a studio or like an arena stadium broadcast. So I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into where you stand with that kind of thing. So what to you is the difference in terms of what you bring as a play-by-play to those different sorts of settings?
Well, I mean, the most important thing when you're sort of asking that kind of a question is, what is the situation with the crowd, right? Do you have a crowd or not? Because that's huge for a play-by-play commentator. I'm sure it is still for a color commentator.
We'll assume you have an audience on Twitch. We'll assume you have an audience online.
Yeah, okay, but when you have an audience online, it doesn't really, like, you don't really feel it, right? But when you're in a stadium and you're casting to a crowd that's potentially thousands strong, you really are feeling that as well. So when I'm casting to an audience, like a live audience, then I'm obviously trying to feel sort of how the room is, right? If they're really, really hyped, they're really, really excited, I might just go a little bit higher. I might go a little bit more excited. I might push that little extra to try and find that emotion or that response maybe from the audience, which then can carry the broadcast even higher. Like if I know that I'm casting IEM Sydney and I know that, for example, Nifty gets a 2 or 3 kill, all I really have to do is say, Nifty! And then everyone's going to go crazy. But if I'm casting in a studio and that 3K happens, it's not quite the same if you literally just yell the player's name. There's no one behind you screaming, no thousands of people behind you screaming. So it just sounds a little bit awkward, and you need to sort of change the way that you commentate. So for me, when I'm in studio, it's more of like a flowy kind of, I try to just weave the words in here and there and describe what's happening and when it's happening. But when I'm in an audience sort of a situation, if the audience is very receptive to what's going on, it's a lot more about trying to engage the audience and get them to do sort of half of my job for me. Because silence, right? If I'm being silent and there's an audience screaming and shouting, that's almost like my job done in a way. I don't even need to say anything, and the moment is still there on the broadcast.
So how do you feel in terms of, let's talk about energy levels for a second, because you did bring that up as well. That is something that I feel when you really look at casting overall, that's been a real point of contention in terms of where is it really meant to sit. And we talk a little bit about, okay, the different settings between, having a live audience and having not a live audience. This is something we kind of brought up here, but in general, what is your sort of take on energy levels of play-by-plays and how you're supposed to temper that?
Well, it's one of the important things, isn't it? Because you often see with newer casters, and we talk about this later on as well, is that there will be a lot of play-by-plays that sort of jump in, or new commentators. They don't even maybe necessarily know that they're a play-by-play. And they think that all they have to do is sound excited and shouty sort of all the time. And that's kind of problematic, because that leads to a degree of viewer fatigue, right? You can't be excited all the time. So it's really important as a play-by-play commentator to recognize when you need to be excited and how excited you need to be at that point in time, right? Because if you're doing a bedroom cast and you're literally giving 110%, let's for the sake of argument say you're giving 150%, so you're belting your lungs out for a bedroom broadcast, and then a week later you come into an IEM Sydney and you can't go any higher than 150%. So you need to sort of, in a way, leave something in the tank for like those really, really big moments. And maybe you'll be left your whole career waiting for that moment. But when it comes, you know, you want to have that perfect line. You want to have that extra level that you can push to sort of show the viewer, if they're someone that's watched you fairly regularly, like, oh shit, like this is a moment that like I really need to pay attention to, as opposed to, oh, this is like every other moment that you've ever casted.
And I think a lot of that comes down to reading the moments correctly as well, because this is where I also think, as a play-by-play, being able to sort of understand the context of what's going on in the game. Because typically you also think about contextually, where would you be doing a studio broadcast versus an arena? Because these sort of arena, stadium, live audience broadcasts happen quite rarely unless you're in certain esports at a certain level. So what it usually means is you may be doing a tournament where the group stage and the majority of the tournament is happening in a studio or even in a bedroom setting for a broadcaster, and then maybe you have a LAN at the end, or maybe you have an arena at the end, and maybe there's an audience or something like that. And so for me as well, it's about finding, looking at a play-by-play role, finding the right moments and understanding the context as well. Because if you're in the group stage, some big stuff might happen, and that may be exciting. In a vacuum, that would be true, but overall, if you look at the context of the tournament, you're just in the Group B pools right now. You're not in a quarterfinal yet. You're not in a semi, and so you got to have something to lead into. You got to have something to work into, because some of those moments are still coming. You got better games coming up. If you are casting one of the better games coming up, in a knockout phase, or you're about to hit the LAN towards the end, you're going to be in a grand final, there's way bigger stuff coming, because that's when the really good games are supposed to be. Even if they're not in a vacuum, the good games, they are the important games. So I feel having the knowledge to identify where to focus your energy in terms of what is actually important is a key element.
Yeah, and it's kind of a hard thing as well, I think, for new commentators, because sometimes you sort of need to do a little bit of that to show what you can do. You're talking about potentially someone that's got a LAN locked in, but what about for those guys that have never done a studio broadcast, right? They're only doing their bedroom casts, and you don't want to be doing 75% that whole time, because then someone's going to look at your VOD and say, well, okay, that's the best that he's got.
Yeah, but the opposite is true. Is if I find it disingenuous and someone's doing over 100 when it's not really calling for it, that's also a check against them, if it was from my perspective. So both things play in here, because I want to see someone being genuine about it. And look, I also mentioned, if really awesome things happen in a vacuum, there is a bit of agency there to maybe take it to a different level, or maybe give it a bit more. But it's got to be true. It's got to be, this is actually something important. This is actually something that's big. Because hey, I'll be honest, in a group game, in a non-important game where you're just playing for points, or you're just playing for map, something crazy might happen, like a Cold Zero, no scope orb kind of thing could actually happen in those types of games. In that sort of case, perhaps you've got the agency to do something with it. In fact, there may be an expectation to do something with it. But for the most part, where I see people go wrong, and we do sort of, I guess we're kind of like filling in small bits of where we think people go wrong here as well, is when the situation doesn't call for the energy level that is being displayed, or the situation doesn't call for the response of the caster, that specific response that they are giving. I feel like that is where that would be a big no-no for me. And if I saw that, if I'm someone with hiring ability and I get the sense of it's just not genuine, that's also a negative for me.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, again, like it's not really about you as a commentator either. It's also about the players, really, at the end of the day. So like if you're trying to take it a little bit too high just for your own reasons or something like that, then that's probably not the right idea either. So that's another issue that I sort of see. But again, something we probably want to talk about a little bit more. Touching on that though, like again, we talk about all these roles of the play-by-play commentator, and I think that is one of the roles of the play-by-play in particular, maybe a little bit more so than it is for the color commentator, at least in the moment, is to make the player the star, right? You need to find that moment, you need to make that the big moment, and you sort of need to nail that moment as well, because obviously half of that or 3/4 of it may actually be that player hitting the shot or finding that position or whatever it is. but you're also there adding your voice to it, and you can take it from like a great moment to like a legendary moment or something like that, for example. So I think that's really important for a play-by-player to think about as well, is that, you know, you are sometimes the make or break between a fantastic clip or just an average clip.
And to speak to the Colour side of that as well, it's not like Colour does nothing here either. I think if for Colour to fit into that, to make a moment really magical, really legendary, for me, it's a lot of, you know, contextual information here. I'm not even really speaking to any analytical content anymore. I'm just saying, you know, it would be a moment where a play-by-play may say, and that's, you know, the most amazing play or something, they just really go nuts. This is just a great play. And then a Colour would come in and say, you know, and this play has been, you know, he's spent the last 2 years working on, you know, getting to this stage. This is his first ever final. It's just really adding the context in these, you know, this is such a big moment for this player because of these reasons, or this team has just been really, you know, they've been underdogs for so long, or this team has just been really wanting this kind of moment, and this is such a huge play for them because of these reasons. And that is, from a Colour perspective, how I would elevate a certain moment into something that could be magical, legendary.
Yeah, definitely. So to sort of sum up, I think I don't know if we're getting toward the end of play-by-play questions, but
I got another one if you wanted to fit one in there. Yeah, well, I was going to speak to what's your take on leading the broadcast, a play-by-play as, okay, first of all, how do you feel about play-by-plays leading the broadcast to start with, and also what is your take on, you know, how that's done in your perspective and how it should be done?
Yeah, I'm glad you sort of asked me this, because this is one that I wanted to touch on as well. We haven't really spoken about it, but I think it's probably like the first thing that you sort of need to learn, even as a play-by-player, like outside of actually commentating the game, is how to lead or host the broadcast, because predominantly, at least if you're just doing a two talent setup and it's just the play-by-play and the color commentator and that's it for the whole show, the play-by-play has to be the host. If you've got a desk and all that sort of stuff, you know, or a stage host, maybe it makes it a bit easier because you're essentially just picking up a throw. But even to that, like, there is an element of still having to be the lead in the commentary duo. You're the one that sort of leads the storylines or leads the conversation, at least, right? Ideally, you've probably worked out storylines prior as a duo, and you know where you want to kind of go with the discussions. But the play-by-play commentator should be the one that's, again, sort of leading the color commentator down that track, and then the color commentator is the one that's sort of picking the apple or the mango or the banana off the tree. I'm pretty impressed with that analogy, by the way. I just picked that up as we were going.
Just picked up the mango.
Yeah, picked up the mango. But yeah, I think you get what I mean, right? You should be taking the color commentator to a position where they can then decide where they want to go with that. But ultimately, it comes down to the play-by-play commentator to sort of start the conversation, get the ball rolling, and be able to keep the conversation flowing when things start to slow down a little bit or fall flat.
And I always see it from a more mechanical stance. It's the play-by-play, sort of leading with the introductions, leading with setting the topics, leading with moving the topics forward in some cases and understanding the timings. This is more of a, you know, if you're a bit more of an experienced broadcaster and you're trying to fit like a run sheet, something like that. You're trying to fit the timings within that. It's about play-by-plays throwing to breaks, or maybe doing a sponsor segment, just leading in that regard as well. I used to see it from, in terms of a partnership with the color. I'm the type of color caster that wants to have as much of an equal relationship in a broadcasting duo as possible, in terms of, I never see it as, and I never want to go into a duo where it's, you know, the play-by-play is a Batman and I'm a Robin. For me, it's more like a Batman or Superman kind of thing. I'm kind of filling a separate role here, but I'm not going to get treated like a sidekick. There's a lead in terms of, there are certain expectations from broadcast side of things where it's better for one person to take a lead in terms of setting the topics and moving things forward. But in terms of how the duo works together, I still see it as very much being, you know, in my perspective and how I would like things to be, is to be very much an equal thing. I don't want to be like a secondary to a play-by-play where it's his show and I'm just here as a sidekick. That to me is definitely a no-go.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. The way I sort of see it as a play-by-play is like, yeah, it's my role to sort of set you up, but then it's your role to sort of make me look good by, you know, helping me out when I potentially find myself in some degree of trouble. So like it's a push and pull between the two. I think I'm sort of out. I'm ready to summarize. So if you've got anything else you want to sort of throw in here for play-by-play, otherwise I'll summarize my thoughts.
I think you summarize, and then I probably got something to say about the summary. Maybe
Okay, sounds
that's
good.
probably how it is.
Yeah, pick me apart just like a good color commentator would. So, okay, to summarize what a play-by-play commentator really should be doing, you should obviously be able to host and lead the conversation. So you need to be able to host the broadcast, which is the intros, the outros, sponsor segments, graphics, etc. Lead the conversation in wherever you need it to be going. Keep the conversation on track as well and keep it interesting, because again, you need to be the one that's bringing up a lot of the topics and making sure that they're fairly relevant for the color commentator to talk about. Then once we're into the game, you need to be able to articulate and describe what is on the screen in a way that adds value, as opposed to just kill feed reading. You need to be able to make the players the stars. You need to bring those moments to life. You need to make sure that you hit the high notes. And you also need to keep the broadcast engaging and interesting from just an auditory perspective, right? I had to look this up, AVRL. I was looking up for a way of saying, something sounds nice, like the audio version of aesthetically pleasing. And it's apparently euphonious. So you want to keep the broadcast euphonious for people that tune in, because ultimately it's your job to sound good, and you need to kind of keep an eye on that.
Remember, guys, euphonious, not phony.
And not euphoric either.
Why can't it be euphoric?
I guess it could be.
As long as it's not phony. Yeah, all of those things for sure. And I suppose, when we get further along the conversation as well, there's definitely a lot more to talk about in terms of, okay, well then how do the two partners work together? We've talked a little bit about, where some of the things should fall in terms of where we think the two casting partners kind of want to fall together, but also I think there's a lot more that play-by-plays learn as they go in, as well, in terms of, okay, this is what I need to do as a play-by-play, and then for both parties, this is also what I need to do for the other person, and that changes from person to person as well, and people have different expectations, and I certainly have expectations that other color casters probably do or don't have.
Do you want to maybe then touch on like what you might expect from a play-by-play commentator from a color perspective?
So some of these things were mentioned already, but to reiterate, from my perspective, I'm 100% not there to be a play-by-play sidekick. I've seen that in some duos, I've seen that on some broadcasts, and maybe sometimes I understand it's because perhaps the color is newer and he needs a bit of hand-holding, or perhaps it's a case where there's a bit of a power difference in terms of veterancy, experience, or star power. Maybe the play-by-play is super famous, or he's super well known, and the color's more of an up-and-comer. In that case, you sort of fall into the area where the color just becomes a bit of a sidekick, and you feel like you're on this other person's show, and you're just kind of a guest on their show. That is definitely not what I ever go for, and I will never be in that position. I don't care how star power, I don't care how famous the guy I'm casting with. I'm not there to be the number two. I'm there to be an equal with whoever I work with.
Yep.
That's really important to me. Because I understand my value. I think it's good for people to know their value. And if you rate yourself as a caster, if you know you're worth your salt, you don't play the sidekick no matter what your role is. Second to that, moving on from that point as well. I think for me, I'm looking for play-by-plays that know how to respect space in terms of timings on segments, in terms of understanding that they're working with someone. And obviously, the more experienced play-by-plays you work with, the less I ever have to think about stuff like that, because every experienced play-by-play I work with, they know how to work with a partner. They know how to give space. They know how to bring them in. They know how to work with someone as a partner and not just as another person on the other side of the world on the internet, which is something I think new duos definitely fall into the trap of. Is it doesn't sound like they're a duo. It sounds like two individual people talking, and then you just put their mixes together on the same audio mix. It's like they're not really working together. They're just two individuals talking. In some cases, it's bad where they're talking over each other, and that's when it really sounds like they don't even realize the other person exists. And in some cases, they're actually giving the space to talk, but it just still doesn't sound synergistic. So I'm looking for synergy. I'm looking to build synergy with play-by-plays as well. I want to have a play-by-play that is really going to want to work with and have a bit of a have the kind of working relationship and the business relationship where it's you can work with them, and it's not about I'm going to do my thing, you're going to do your thing. We're going to talk about how we're going to approach topics and things together at the same time and sort of be aligned. So I'm looking for a bit of alignment there as well. So yeah, those are a couple of things I think are quite important coming from a color perspective of what I'm looking for in a play-by-play. And then as well as just someone that's good. I obviously want to work with people that are good. So that's maybe that's maybe getting a little bit, you know, off topic a little bit. That's just like, well, you obviously want people to be good. That's like a no-brainer, right? So this is more about like, I guess what we're trying to talk about in the episode is like, well, what makes someone good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of what you're talking about really is to do with like selfish play-by-play commentators and that kind of thing, right? Where they feel like they're the star of the show. And again, that sort of ties back into as a commentator, and particularly as a play-by-play commentator, because I've seen this a lot with newcasters, is like, you're not the star of the show. You are there to make the stars of the show. And if you're making the broadcast about you, then it's probably not a good cast. Anyway, I think that's play-by-play more or less wrapped up. So do you want to move on to color then?
Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So give me your like summary, maybe like a sentence or 2 sentences of what a color commentator is.
No, in only 2 sentences or less.
I did mine in 1. Just saying, for play-by-play.
I'll give you a paragraph. It's chapter 1. What is a good color commentator? I think a good color commentator needs to understand all the different things that encompass color, and it's not really just one thing. I think this is also kind of true for play-by-play, but a lot of play-by-play just sort of imagine, okay, well, it's mostly I'm just going to really call the game, and then the rest of the context comes in. But for color, you're not just doing one thing. You're not just doing analysis. You're not just talking about, you're not just trying to be a funny guy. You're not just trying to do one thing. You want to be able to do a lot of things, and it's a very flexible, broad kind of role. And the best color commentators that I've seen are kind of able to do a lot of things. I don't want to say everything, but they can do the vast majority of things very, very well. And what they don't do well, they can make up for, and what they do well shine through extremely well. So that would be, I don't know, it's quite general what I just said. It's quite, I guess, broad. And
it definitely wasn't 1 or 2 sentences either.
More in depth. I said I was going to do a paragraph. I don't know. I don't know if I do 2 sentences.
All right, let's dive a little bit deeper then, and start off with, like, obviously we've talked a lot about storylines and that kind of thing. And while I believe that is largely a job of a play-by-play commentator as well, that's probably one of the most important things that you sort of have to set up as a color commentator. Do you agree, or am I off the mark here?
Well, it's a both. I think we can agree it's both parties here.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of bringing it up more in the actual cast itself, because there's a couple of phases here. There is the pre-game stuff where maybe you're on desk together or you're just on camera together, and then there's the actual in-game stuff. There's some post-game stuff. Maybe you're looking at some stats post-game or even in the middle of the game. But for the most part, when you're actually in the middle of the game and things are happening in real time, that's when I'm looking at color to bring up the story a little bit more and to really remind people where we are, why do we care, why does it matter, and to bring that back to what's going on, because that's important for a tournament, that's important for an event. Otherwise, it's just any game. Otherwise, you're watching any old game. You might as well be watching a show match that doesn't have any stakes in it. You really have to remind people, and you really have to remind yourself, maybe even, hey, why does this game matter?
Yeah, I think one of the important things that you have actually taught me when we were doing a VOD review back in the day for Overwatch, when I was doing a bit of I was a little bit more quasi color commentator when I was casting with Sandman. Obviously, I'm sort of full play-by-play now casting with Smash, but when I was doing color with Ben, we were doing a VOD review, and you sort of said to me, you have to find the why. Like, that was the thing that sort of stuck with me. That's what I keep thinking about when I sort of encompass what does a color commentator do. It's about finding the why or explaining the why. And every time you say something, you need to answer why. Like,
and now every time you cast Pilly, you're like, Pilly, why?
Yeah, exactly. Why? Like, why are they doing this? Why have you said that? Why do you think they should do that? Like, what is the reason for this? And that's what the color commentator is to me.
Exactly, and I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of forgot that. I mean, I don't forget it in terms of it's always in the repertoire. It's there. I just don't consciously think about it anymore. But I think for people coming up, it is going to have to be something you think about, because to know what to talk about, if you can answer the question of why, then you know what to talk about, because the what is really easy to figure out. I feel like the what is just there on the screen.
Yep.
Hey, what is it? Well, it's this. But why is it is the harder question. Most people don't know why. And that's where good analysis comes through. That's where good, the research comes through, the contextual stuff comes through, even storylines comes through. Like, why is something happening? Well, let's look at the context of the storyline, because these guys are desperate. These guys have wanted it for 3 years. All sorts of different things can come through. There's animosity between the teams. This guy has beef with that guy on the team. He's going to run after him when maybe he shouldn't. Just there are these things that exist that, for Colour, you want to know about these things. This is what's going to really elevate the difference between, someone that doesn't really cut the mustard as a Colour and someone that is extremely good. So just really looking at it at a deeper level than surface level.
So do you think there's like different kinds of color commentators as well? Like, are there the guys that are sort of super analytical, and I would probably put you into that category, versus someone who is a little bit more storyline driven and wants to try and find little bits of odds and ends and trinkets and that kind of thing to sort of bring up on the broadcast?
You'd be surprised. I don't consider myself a hyper analytical commentator, and that's because I've seen. If I bring up some examples, I'm not going to name
no,
anyone.
I think
I bring
we
up
can.
some examples.
Can we?
I
think it's interesting.
Well, we'll leave it contextual. It depends. It depends if I'll say if you want to bring up people,
I'll bring up one.
But I'll think about who and if I want to bring them up and whether that's a good idea for me to do.
Can I throw one at you?
Sure.
I'll say one of the best analytical commentators, and I'll throw this as an analytical as opposed to like a more of a hybrid sort of color commentator, is Papa Smithy from League of Legends, right? I think he's the kind of guy that, if you throw a League of Legends question, like League of Legends related question at him, he knows the answer to it. Like, this champion matchup versus that champion matchup, this ability versus that ability, what does it do? Why does it do it? How does it do it? And how does it affect the game? Like, to me, like, he's kind of the quintessential analytical commentator, but it's not to say that he doesn't sort of work on those storylines and that kind of thing.
So this is where I'm going to flex my color knowledge.
All right, let's go.
You'd be surprised if I told you that he wasn't. Not to say he's not an analytical person, but what you're describing. We talked about he last cast in LCK with Papa Smithy. Let's talk about LCK for a second. You want to talk about someone that's hyper analytical and that's going to really tell you the nitty gritty, tell you everything about the League of Legends games. You're talking about LS.
Yeah,
that's who you're talking about.
Definitely.
Papa Smithy is actually, to me, he is a prime example of someone that I've really looked up to and I really look at as an example of what is a really good color caster, and some that encompasses a broad range of things. So this is why I said, early on, I was like, you're saying, okay, what makes a good color? I'm saying good color is not one or two or X or Y things. It's like everything. It's all of these different things. It's a bunch of different things and doing as many of them as you can or all of them well. And when I look at Papa Smithy, the first thing I think is I do not think of he is a hyper analytical caster. He's got analysis. He's got an extremely high level of analysis in there, but I see him as a historian. I see him as a contextual storyline historian because he is the LCK Bible in my books, where you ask him something about, hey, talk to me about 27 spring, this team, and he'll tell you about it. Talking about what happened here. He knows about all the histories. He knows about who played who won, what happened in those games. Maybe not super specific, memory starts to fade after a while. But the story beats are there. Okay, this guy beat that guy in this split of that year. And then he's held that grudge for 3 splits. He knows these sorts of things. He's got all the storylines. This team has failed to live up to these expectations for how many splits, and this specific player has been a part of that problem for what, all these different story beats. Well, that's what I really see Papa Smithy as, and that's something that he's really mastered. And part of that is being paying a lot of attention to his work in that region, but also having been there basically forever, having been there for so long that the history is just there. And I kind of got that I started to really get that way with the Pacific region in Overwatch when I was still casting it, which was like all the way up until this year. And so because I'd been there since the start, 2017, up until basically this year, I've seen it all. I know everything that happened in that region. I know every single tournament, like all the important results, all the important players, where they've gone. In a way, I started to develop into that role as well. So this is why, even for me, I'm saying, you see me as a very analytical caster. I do, but I also don't see myself in that way because I've seen myself really develop into the other areas, and I've made it a really important priority for me to develop in all these other areas that is not just analysis. I feel like personally for me, my analysis has been at a very adequate or comfortable and also very high and very good level for my expectations. I have pretty high standards. And so because I've been pretty satisfied with my standard of analysis, I've had a lot of prioritization on working on everything else. And so I'm trying to be way more rounded. And I would see myself now as a much rounded color caster in terms of doing everything, having the context, having the storylines, having the banter, having the humor, and having all the other color things, but also still maintaining that analysis that I've always had.
Yeah, so like for you, it's fair to say that at least the way that you see color commentary is it's more of a package deal, right? You're not just an analyst. You're not just a storyline builder.
You can't be. Yeah. I don't think you can be, personally, for me. Yeah.
At least not in this day and age, to be the best. You probably can get away with it, right?
Because if you're just an analyst, you belong on the desk. You're not a caster, in my book. That's harsh to say, but
maybe there's still a place for you, but not on the commentary
you're
desk.
Not adding enough to the broadcast, in my opinion, because I listen to the really, really good color commentators, and they're not just spitting out analysis.
Yeah,
they're not just doing that.
The TLDR is like you're not there to be the encyclopedia in a way. You're not there to be the guy that is telling you all the time why something is happening. You're not a player. You're not a coach. That may be a better way of saying it. You're not a coach. You don't need to tell us exactly what is happening and why it's happening all the time. But you're there to entertain us at the end of the day.
You're not the encyclopedia. You're the bookshelf.
Yeah.
You got all the books, and that's the thing as well. You're actually, that's funny you bring up that, because and this, by the way, is no slight against LS. Huge respect to him. He's like one of the most knowledgeable color casters, I think, in any game. And that's for sure his strength. So that aside, though, when I look at other, when I start, especially less experienced color commentators, I'm now not naming anyone specifically. I'm just talking about maybe people below the level of standard studio broadcaster. Even if they are at that level, I definitely see a lot of what I would consider to be basically VOD reviewers. I call them VOD reviewers because all they're doing is they're spitting pure analysis to me and nothing else. They're giving me nothing else except pure analysis. All they're telling me is basically what a coach would tell me if I was a pro player in that game. They're looking at it from a coach perspective, which I think is useful, by the way, in certain contexts, and I do that as well. But if that's all you're bringing to the table, you literally are a VOD reviewer, not a caster.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Pretty insightful as well, even for me, right? I've been involved in esports for 5 or 6 years, so kind of good to get another opinion on these things. We haven't really talked much about how you work with a play-by-play commentator, though, as a color caster. So I think we've kind of more or less gone super in-depth in deciding what exactly it is a color commentator should be doing, but how do they do it when you're working with a play-by-play caster?
So again, it's very much what I said about what my expectations from a play-by-play were, and we're now kind of flipping the script, and I guess I'll get your take on that soon as well. And flipping the script for me would be like, I want to bring value to the play-by-play. I want to say useful things that they can work with. So for example, setting people up is a big one for me. I will want to have threads dangled in front of me from my play-by-play, but I want to have options. The same thing applies when I'm doing the opposite. So I will give out analysis, and I may dangle some threads there, and those options are always available to my play-by-play. I will never put them into a corner. I will never force them to take any of those, but I want them to be on the table, and then they can select what they would like to work with. Giving options, I feel, is super useful for both casters in both situations and both roles. And so I feel like a color that is able to sort of apply and give that context, not just to the audience, but also to the play-by-play partner, to say, hey, these are the things that are happening. Here are my expectations. I believe this is what we can expect coming up, and here's maybe a reason why. And then I'm also the type of person, if we want to get into more mechanical detail here, where specifically I will then also bring up, I wouldn't just say the energy level, but bring it towards a play-by-play. It's sort of, I kind of think of it as like a flow of casting where it's not just I stop talking and you start talking. Mm-hmm. In a vacuum, it may be that, but how it works and how I've sort of laid the foundations is not exactly that. How it actually happens is I will lead into something that is very easy for a play-by-play to pick up on. And typically for me, that will be something like, and so I'm expecting so-and-so to happen. We're about to head into this. And look, you can see this guy come in and now he's using this. And then bam. So you can see the last couple of words or just towards the tail end of the sentence, I'm almost getting into, if I were to play-by-play that, I'm now joining up the color and the play-by-play, getting to a space where like this is where I would be going into it as a play-by-play, and those last couple of words right at the tail end of the sentence is immediately picked up on by play-by-play, and it's an entirely seamless experience. What I really dislike and what I really doing my research I've seen when the synergy is not there is you have a gap, whether it's between the play-by-play stopping and handing off or the color handing off. There's a gap where someone stops talking, a pit happens, and the big cliff, and then you go back up. I never do that. I never want to do that. It's just going to be a smooth transition through. You will never see a pit. You will never see this, like, the curve go downwards before it goes back up. It's just going to be a smooth curve the whole way.
Yeah, and this is one of the most important things for me as well as a play-by-play commentator. And if we're starting now to get into what I want from a color commentator, this is like almost the number one thing, right? Is the matching of the energy and being able to set me up for the play-by-play. Like, take this as an analogy. I'm really full of them today, Avril. We've got a trebuchet,
Mangoes,
right?
to me.
No, well, I guess maybe we can tie mangoes in, right? We've got a trebuchet, okay? And it's ready to fire, but there's nothing in it right now. I'm the trebuchet. The play-by-play commentator is the trebuchet. I want you to put the mango in the basket that I can then shoot into the fight. I really want to be able to unleash, but you need to set me up properly and give me that opportunity, build the level up enough, and provide me the segue into the fight that I need as a play-by-play commentator to really be able to go kind of crazy. So that's a really, really important one. I think that as a play-by-play commentator, I really, really want my color commentators to nail that.
Yeah, and so that's one thing as well. And I guess furthermore from there, just understanding what my play-by-play wants as well, understanding when they want to come in. And this is really, when you work with someone for a while, you sort of understand the synergy there. You sort of understand what their preferences are. You also probably have a lot more experience in the game as well. You sort of understand where in the game is it good for a transition to happen, or maybe if the timing's not right and something crazy happens you didn't account for, you have to be good enough to know how to drop something and for someone else to pick it up. Now, this is where I'm going to get into sort of where I see a bit of I wouldn't say a pet peeve, but I see mistakes coming through. And this is where I can be critical of when I look at especially high-level broadcasts with very good talent, except they don't regularly work with partners that often. They sort of switch partners quite a lot. They don't have that level of synergy. And I'm now going to be talking about some of the high-level broadcasts like LCS and LEC and stuff like that. First of all, highly respect the broadcast and highly respect all the talent on there. They're all super talented. But the one thing that's very apparent to me, because they don't work with a single partner as much as a dedicated duo would, they're sort of swapping around quite liberally for the most part. You definitely see a thing where it's the kind of thing where they're in the middle of a game, and then someone will, maybe first blood is about to happen or something's about to happen on the screen, and the color cast will just abruptly cut themselves off, like talking, and just nothing. There's no hint, no setup, no warning. It's like they're talking, and then the guy in the audio disc just like turn them off. It's what is that? Like, I don't understand what that is. Like, give me something more. Give me, if that's what you want to happen, like chain it over to the next segment, or like, have some sort of bridge there. I'm driving up to a bridge. Here's my analogy. I'm driving up to a bridge. I think it's there, and then my car falls in the fucking water because you didn't put a bridge there for me. As a viewer, as someone listening, there was no bridge. You dropped me in the water, and now I'm swimming. Whereas, I don't like that. I would prefer if they connected the segments together, even if you saw something you didn't expect to happen, and some jungler jumps out that maybe it was fog of war, was turned off by the spectators or something. Maybe you just weren't paying attention. Bam, the thing happens, and you just drop. That's, to me, is really bad.
Yeah, I'd probably rather you talk over the play-by-play a little bit to at least set it up and give me that launch pad into the moment, as opposed to dropping it straight away. Sort of ties into my next moment, or my next thing that I want from my color commentators, is that I don't want them to throw me under the bus. And I guess that's a pretty broad statement, because there's a lot of things that you could do to throw a play-by-play under the bus. For example, asking them a question or leading them down a direction that they probably don't want to talk about. Like, at the end of the day, your job as a color commentator is to be the guy that's explaining things, is to be the guy that's sort of setting up the storylines and that sort of thing. It's not necessarily on the play-by-play commentator. So if you suddenly throw that back at him, he's probably not going to be prepared for it quite as well as you might be. So you might think that he's got a really good setup.
Yeah.
But he's probably not ready for it, so I'd rather you just avoid it, right? And that's the kind of a case of, like, the same in play-by-play, where it's like you don't want to directly ask your co-commentator a question unless you know that they've got the answer for it, right? Just make sure that you're sort of on the same page and not throwing each other under the bus. That's a really important one as well for color casters.
Yep. That applies both ways. I think neither commentator throws the other one under the bus. But to speak to the last point you just brought up, but if you're going to ask a question, know that they can answer it. Well, I'm going to add another layer to that. Know that they want to answer it.
Yeah.
Because look, I know the. You ask me something about Overwatch, I can give you the answer. Do I want to give you the answer? That's a different question.
Maybe not.
Because this is where I get into the territory of like, this is more personal for me, and this is, I know what I'm about to talk about is going to be the most contentious part of color commentary, and any pro level color commentary is going to look at what I'm about to say, and some of them are going to agree with me, some of them are going to shake their heads, and to be honest, there's no right answer. There is just what the specific person's style is, what they feel comfortable with, what they are good at, what they feel is good, and there's no pure 100% black and white answer here. But for me, don't ask me questions. Don't do it. Unless we've discussed that I'm open to doing that for certain things. The problem I have with being asked questions as a color commentator is I am being, and I guess there's different levels to this, is you can ask an open-ended question where I can answer it however I like, or you can answer a very specific question where I have to give you a very specific answer. And so I would prefer if you didn't ask me a question at all, but if you were going to ask me one, give me an open-ended question. And the reason I don't like questions is because this is where you, on one hand, the positive side is you say, oh, I'm setting up my color. But on the negative side, it's you're also putting your color into a corner because they now have to answer these questions. If you ask me a question, I'm expected now to answer this, right? If I don't answer this, something is wrong. Either I don't respect you, or I'm deaf, I didn't hear what you said, or I don't know, and all of those answers, all of those reasons are bad.
Yep.
So I have to answer this question now. You've put me in a corner. You've decided my color segment for me, and especially in a game like Overwatch, I got limited time. I got such small windows of time to talk about what I want to talk about. If you throw me a question, I probably have to spend my whole segment on that question, and guess what? That means I don't get to talk about what I actually want to talk about. There was something more important I want to talk about, and now I can't do that because you put me in a corner. What the fuck's up with that? And some casters will like that because, hey, if I'm new to a game or I don't know much and my play-by-play is quite knowledgeable, I will probably appreciate them asking me questions and helping me out and really setting me up. That's something I will really want. But if I'm an experienced color caster who knows my shit, I know Overwatch back to front, and you ask me questions, first of all, I probably know, not just young conceit about it, but typically I will know Overwatch better than my play-by-plays, right?
I think that's fair. You're supposed to.
Yeah. And I've yet to meet a play-by-play with more knowledge. Again, not to sound conceited, but I've yet to work with a play-by-play that's been more knowledgeable on the topic than I have been. So it's like, why would you decide my color topic for me when I am more knowledgeable in the topic than you are? I should decide the topic. When it gets to me, it's my color segment. I know what the most important thing to talk about from a color perspective is. You don't. Well, maybe, like, not to sound disparaging, like, it's not that you don't, but it's like, I really should have a better idea of what my color segment is, and I know what the most important thing is to talk about. So really, the thing I'm looking for is either give me an open-ended question that I can, or rhetorical question that I'm allowed to refuse, and for that to be okay, or don't ask me a question at all and end it on something a little bit more neutral, and then I can pick up where I, like I said, give me options, dangle me some threads, and let me decide if I want to pick any of those up. But likely, I've got my own thread running. I've already pre-planned my segments. I already know what I want to talk about. You throw me in the deep end with something I didn't prepare for, that's a big no-no in my book. And you're deciding my topic and my segment for me. That's another big no-no in my book. I'm deciding the topic because I'm the color caster. I know what's going on. I know my shit because I'm knowledgeable. I don't ever want a play-by-play to decide what I need to talk about. I should be deciding what I'm talking about.
You must really hate the analyst, SK.
No, because that's different.
Just so everything you're saying here is like, man, I hate asking questions. I hate answering questions. But
no,
yeah, obviously I understand.
Contextually, no, it's very different. So now, someone takes a sound bite of that, and I never get hired for desk again. But the difference is, I love doing desk, and desk is very different because the expectation is different. On desk, that's the expectation. There's a host. They are asking questions, and the questions it's for the audience as well. It's for everybody, and it's for a certain purpose. Right, you are there to serve a different purpose on the desk than on broadcast on the actual cast. So if I'm on the cast, there is a purpose that I'm trying to serve there as a color caster versus what I am expected to do on a desk, and what is the purpose I'm trying to serve on the desk. In fact, I would maybe do a 180 here and say, hey, it's quite good to ask questions on desk. I would want to get asked questions on desk because that's kind of how you first of all, from a desk is usually big. You usually have 3-4 people. And so asking questions, what the first thing it does is it allows the host to choose, okay, how do I direct people? How do I specifically go to somebody? Well, this is one way to naturally do that. Otherwise, it gets quite chaotic. Who's talking? Whose turn is it to go? Who's being addressed? Asking someone something direct just completely pushes that out of the way, and it's no longer an obstacle. So there's just certain things you do on desk, and that is expected on desk, and it's good for desk, that may not be good for a cast, and that's the difference of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. I understand that as well, and I think we're obviously diving down a little bit of an analysis rabbit hole now. So
God, I'm good at analysis.
Bring it back to color. Yeah, AVRL is very good at analysis and color commentary, so hire him for both. He's very happy to be on the analyst desk, even though he doesn't like answering questions while being a commentator. But yeah, look, let's dive back into the color commentary side of things. And I want to sort of bring up my final point for what I want the color commentator to do as a play-by-play is I really enjoy it when a color commentator assists me with the play-by-play with the hype moments. So I don't know what it's like for you as a color commentator and how you work with, obviously you work with Pixie most of the time. But for me, I like it when my color commentator will interject and add something during the middle of the fight. Gives me a little bit of time to sort of breathe, a little half second to reset myself and get ready to launch again. Or I really like it when they add that sort of exclamation, wow, that kind of thing when a big moment happens, because I think that's what sort of indirectly even pushes me to the next level as a play-by-play commentator, and I hit that next level.
Yeah, there's two things there. There's one of them you talked about is an interjection. The other one's more of a reaction. I definitely like doing both. I think both are very good. But finding the time for them is very important as well. I think that's something that people need to look out for, because knowing when is acceptable to do either of those things is going to, make your broadcast much better, or it's going to start taking away from your broadcast. And definitely, it's been a lot of trial and error for me. I've had to really think about, okay, when is it appropriate for me to come in? I've had conversations with Pixies about it as well, where we've had to discuss for both parties, by the way, how interjecting should work, if we want to do it at all, and then where is acceptable, because the last thing I want to do is come in during when the play-by-play is in the zone, he's riding that wave, and I'm just pushing him off the surfboard. It's not what I want to do. So I want to make sure that I'm coming in for a good reason, and that it is something that is accepted by my play-by-play, like that's something he's wants to work with and wants to include into the broadcast and into the duo. And also, even for the audience, even for me, it's you want to pick your moments, because it can't just be every single reasonable thing that happens. You're like, ooh, or you're like, oh, that was great. You gotta, it loses its meaning super fast if you're just doing it every other kill. And so I'm also being picky now. I'm really saving my interjection moments, or I'm really saving when I want to give a reaction or how I want to do that, because I want it to count. I want it to be felt.
You want it to be a how moment.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
That's like the perfect example of that, though, right?
I guess, yeah. I still look back at that. I'm thinking, I don't know. I still look back as like, oh, did I go too big there? I maybe should have chilled out a bit. Like it was.
That was the biggest.
It was
moment.
Genuine.
Yeah, it was the biggest moment in Australian Contenders history, so it deserved it.
It was, but that's the thing is, I didn't fake any of it. For me, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just gunning for a moment to scream. I'm never doing that. I'm never trying to gun for a moment to scream. And that's why for me, when it actually happens for real, and I feel it deeply, like this is right. And it's not even, I'm not even like processing an algorithm in my head or anything. It's just like, it was a natural reaction. It's like I was sitting at home on a couch. It's like, any other moment where I'm just there. I'm part of I could be someone in the audience. I'm someone in the audience right now watching this live, having an out of body experience. And that was my true reaction. That was a completely unfiltered, unplanned, unscripted reaction.
Yep. Well, that makes sense to me. And I really appreciate when that sort of thing happens from my color commentator. Because again, like I said, this pushes my play-by-play to the next level, and I think it really makes the moment. But yeah, it is pretty important that you get it right, because if you overuse it, or just do it wrong, like it can come off really awkward and kind of cringy in a way.
Yeah. Or you're just pissing off your play-by-play because you're taking their moments. I'm also very understanding about what moments are acceptable for whom. I remember when we did, I say we, but you weren't there. Season 1 Contenders Finals. You were doing
sorry,
something,
mate. I was in Dallas.
Mate, you were Mr. Dallas back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ben and I did the grand finals. That's when Sydney Drop won their first final. And before the broadcast, I just sort of had a quick chat with Ben. I was like, okay, let's just set a couple things straight real quick, and we sort of just like, because we don't have like done a cast together once or twice before that for the Super Week, and we'd never done a practice cast or anything. So I understand as a grand final, it's a pretty big deal. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not stepping over any toes, that we're going to be understanding of like where we fit into this particular duo for this particular match.
Yeah.
And Australia was like, you take the final moment. I'm not going to say anything. When the game's about to end, you got the full runway, and you take that plane into the sky. I'm not touching it, and I'll come in afterwards, and I'll do my big thing afterwards, where I say all the great things about how the team won and why it was cool and all that. But during that winning moment, it's all yours, and I'm not going to step in. I'm not going to interject. You take that one home. And so really setting those expectations was, I think, really important to make sure that, when the time comes, they have the confidence to know this is their moment. And then after that, I have the confidence to know it's my moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's another really important one for play-by-play and color in general, is to make sure that you have the understanding of whose role is where and who's doing what, and making sure that no one's sort of overstepping the line. But I think we've kind of touched on most of the aspects of color commentary that we need to, and I'm ready to move on to where newer casters tend to fall short. I'm going to stop it there, guys. Sorry to interrupt halfway through the video, and that is only halfway through the video. We ended up going for a couple of hours, certainly a lot longer than we intended to, so we've ended up deciding to turn this into 2 separate videos. This first half obviously coming out as you're watching it right now. The second half will be out next week on Saturday at the usual time. I'll also put a link in the channel description if you're tuning in a little bit later on down the track to where that video can be found. So hopefully you've enjoyed, and hopefully you come back for the second half. In that second half, we're going to be talking about a lot of the mistakes that newer commentators do tend to make, and maybe offering some suggestions as to how you can fix those. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you coming back again in the next episode.